Welcome to week 3, and just as the students here are walking on a very fine spring day on SOU's campus, we're going to be walking down the path of studying and understanding legal and ethical issues involving torts and product liability. How'd you like that for combining the two concepts? You're probably getting tired of seeing this by now, but please do check the Moodle site, read the announcements. If you're not getting at least one announcement from me every week, something is wrong, and find out what's going on if that's the case. Chapters 7 and 11 in Advanced Business Law are on our agenda for this week, and also read that article on Tide Pods. And after you do all that, respond to the discussion question. In Chapter 7, we're going to look at tort law, and tort is just a wrong, or in some way someone has harmed another person. It can be an intentional, negligent, or it could be a situation where they are strictly liable for the wrong. In Figure 7.1, the dimensions of tort liability really gives you a good view of all the different connections of liability and torts. And so really take a look at that and examine that, because that is really important to have an understanding of that. And strict liability is just a situation where for your product, you did your best. You tried everything, you examined everything, but you're still liable for it. And we'll get into a little bit more detail of that later on. And one of the important defenses against a tort is that whole concept of assumption of risk, that the plaintiff knew what they were doing. This came up in the river rafting business many years ago in the 80s, and it still comes up a lot in a variety of businesses. But there was a situation where an outfitter in the Grand Canyon ran the river at about 100,000 cubic feet per second, which is about 5 times the normal amount of water that flows through there. It was a big flood year, and somebody drowned when they had a flip in one of the big rapids. And the company, their defense was, hey, the person who drowned knew that it was dangerous and knew what they were getting into. So that kind of gives you an idea of that assumption of risk. In this whole section, take a look at that intentional interference with contractual relations with businesses and organizations. That refers to Texaco versus Pennzoil. And that gives you a pretty good understanding of some of the concepts there of how different organizations can get involved with each other in the whole issue of tort claims. And then look at duty of care for products. You look at that, and it really comes down to you had a duty, you breached that duty, you caused some harm, and the harm is measurable in terms of some sort of compensation. And then also look at the restatement of the law of torts. This broadly shows you that law changes, and right now I believe it's on the 3rd restatement of law of torts, and there's 6 aspects of that that have come up for review right now. So obviously this is pretty quick look at tort law, but we'll be talking more about this in some of the discussions we're going to have, and we also will look at this in some of the other information I'll be providing for you. At the end of the chapter, the cases are optional. You do not have to read them, only if something interests you. It's up to you. Have a good day. if you're still with me, we're moving on to Chapter 11, Product Liability. And if you look at product liability, that first part has some really good information from Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, a very famous book. If you have the opportunity, you should read it at least once in your life, but don't read it before a meal because it will make you somewhat queasy, and probably you'll never want to eat again. But just as an example, that is just an example of the whole concept of consumer safety and product liability. And when we look at this whole concept of product liability, we look at contract theory and tort theory. And if you look at the figure there, 11.1, it gives you really good visualization of the concepts of product liability. Contract theory with warranty concept is there's express and implied. Express is the comments you make or written representation about the product. For example, I think in the book they mentioned something about people, if they say, okay, a car can get X amount of miles per gallon, and it's an absurd amount, then obviously the reasonable customer would understand that. But if they said, well, this will get 30 miles per gallon and it really only gets 25 or 20, then there could be an issue about an express warranty. And then implied warranty, using the same auto example, would be something similar to you expect as a consumer that the car, will drive, will get you from point A to point B, and will have some sort of motorized method of transportation or some method of momentum, and get you where you want to go. Looking at tort theory, and again, tort is harm. You look at negligence and strict product liability, and tort theory is, with negligence, is the whole concept of, okay, you can't do something that you willfully will know will cause harm, or you have the reasonable assumption that it would cause harm. And that's where the whole concept of negligence comes in. You were negligent for doing something, and so there you caused harm. And then strict product liability is the thought that, okay, you have a product, you're liable for it within, obviously certain frontiers, I guess we would call it. And then with warranties, you can have a full or limited warranty. A full warranty is you warrant the product and you will replace the product. For example, if you buy a dishwasher, you will, and it breaks down, you get a new dishwasher. If it's a limited warranty, it might be we will fix the part. But it might even be more limited, saying we will only supply the parts, you have to supply the labor to fix the product. And then looking at privity, privity is just sort of who's in the chain. And you can have horizontal privity or vertical privity, and a couple concepts. Let me give you a couple of examples. Horizontal privity is, let's say, for example, the product injured not only the person who purchased the product, but people nearby. That would be an example of horizontal privity. And then vertical privity could be, a situation, let's say, who's responsible for the product? Is it just the person who sold the product, or the person who the wholesaler, or was it the person who actually, the factory that produced the product? I was involved with a lawsuit about 30 years ago on a product called EFIS, which is a stucco coating, and the stucco coating on the buildings we had leaked and created a black mold situation, which caused the medical issues with some of the employees. And so we sued not only the installer but the general contractor of the building, and then the wholesaler, and then the actual company who manufactured the product, because we were trying to get as much compensation as we possibly could to fix the problem. And then you look at the whole issue of negligence, and you really can't warrant or neglect negligence, because if you are negligent and it's proven you are negligent, then you really have no defense. Later on in this chapter, when you look at the whole concept of liability, look at that third restatement of strict liability. There's been, this gives you an example of how laws change or how they're interpreted. And even though when they do get reinterpreted, not everybody specifically adopts changes to represent the interpretation, it is a way, we look at products, we look at the legal system, and it does evolve. Sometimes people talk about tort reform. You might hear this quite a bit. And tort reform means, we really almost have too many legal remedies and legal avenues for people who feel they have been harmed. And most people, when they talk about tort reform, say the costs are just getting too high, let's say medical malpractice, and the only people that are benefiting are the attorneys in this situation. So we really need to change, the legal process on this. And there's cases for and against that whole situation. Cases are optional in this chapter, although I do recommend that failure to warn case. I think it's pretty interesting about the Sears smoke detector. Gives you a real good summary of the product liability. And also, if you want a good summary, take a look at that summary at the end of the chapter. Very, very good synopsis of all the material. All right, that's it for chapter 11. My last thoughts: make sure you're reading the weekly overviews so you know what assignments you have. Stay current with those assignments. And remember, executive briefing is due this week. And it's right back there in our week 1 module. So take a look at that. So if you're a part of any organization that provides products or services, what we've been talking about will be very, very important for you to have an understanding of these situations. Look at that Pinto case that we did last week and be thinking about some of the current cases. I mentioned some of them here, including Tide Pods. And most of the aspects, concepts that we've studied this week and also last week, and that more we'll do in the future, will involve certain components of each of those cases. And if you haven't been served with a notice of tort claim, which is a notice of harm that you might have a lawsuit filed against your organization, someday this might happen to you, no matter how ethical and attentive you are. I know in different roles that I've served as leader of different organizations, anytime something happens, we always try to be as upfront, as ethical, and as responsive to our customers as possible. And still, we usually we'd get 1 to 2 tort claims about every other year, and most of them were dismissed, and most of them could be easily resolved. But there were times when I went to trial as a witness for those cases, and there's many, many times that I gave depositions. So it does happen, and it's great if you know about the experience, what you're going to be looking at, and have the background that we're going to be studying in this course to give you the foundation you need to make the right choices. Have a good day. And if you have questions or comments, please send me an email.